Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We're looking at the hidden forces, like migration, economics, and deep historical ties that are completely redefining the national sports teams we all cheer for. We usually think of a national squad as a straightforward reflection of a country's borders, right? But the reality underneath is way more complex, super fluid, and, honestly, fascinating.
So here's a provocative question to kick us off. What actually makes a national team truly national in today's globalized world? When you're watching a major international tournament, are you just seeing a competition of birthplaces? Or are you looking at a massive, complex web of modern heritage, vast diasporas, and highly optimized global talent pipelines?
To put this whole thing into perspective, just think about the number 84. That is the exact number of foreign-born players who laced up their boots at the 2018 Men's World Cup. We're talking about more than 11% of all the players at that single tournament, representing a country completely different from the one they were actually born in. Crazy, right?
Which brings us to our first section, the global football pitch, and how talent is moving way beyond borders.
Look, today, an athlete's sporting nationality is about way more than just the hospital they were born in. It encompasses heritage, residency, and deep personal identity. And when you look at the structural features of modern sports migration, it makes total sense. Talent development routinely crosses international borders now. You've got these global scouting networks identifying kids incredibly early, sometimes barely teenagers, and moving them across continents into elite specialized academies. On top of that, expanding diaspora communities mean national eligibility pools are wider than ever. The whole idea of a homegrown player is evolving because, well, athletes today just hold multi-layered cultural identities.
All right, let's move to Section 2, quantifying leg drain and the actual cost of this talent.
What's really wild here is that we can actually stick a measurable economic price tag on these shifting national identities. You've probably heard of brain drain, right? When highly skilled workers migrate to wealthier economies. Well, athletes are doing the exact same thing, transferring their human capital between national teams. Economists have coined this leg drain, and because professional football players have publicly observable market values, this acts as a highly visible, totally quantifiable version of the brain drain. We can literally measure the human capital a country gains or loses when a citizen decides to wear a different jersey.
And that leads us to this absolute jaw-dropper of a number, 20.7 billion euros. This isn't just some abstract cultural shift. We are talking about billions, with a B, in athletic human capital, legally changing national allegiance.
To really wrap your head around the scale of this, nearly 40% of the total 52.8 billion euro global player market value is tied up in multinational eligible players. Think about that for a second. Literally 4 out of every 10 euros in global footballing value belongs to a player who has the legal right to pick and choose between different national identities.
So, let's get into Section 3, the best 11 counterfactual. Let's play a little game of what if. Imagine an alternate reality for a second, where players could only represent their birth countries. No switching allowed. The hidden economics suddenly become glaringly obvious. Look at France. Without migration, they lose over half their squad value. Their best 11 plummets from 960 million euros to just 447 million. But on the flip side, look at the Democratic Republic of Congo. If every single player of Congolese descent had to play for their birth nation or the nation of their parents without switching, DR Congo's squad value would nearly triple to 355 million euros. And it gets weirder. Italy actually loses value in reality compared to this counterfactual, dropping by 185 million. Why? Mainly because a ton of players with Italian heritage are choosing to play for Latin American nations instead.
So looking at the asymmetry of this leg drain, the data reveals a massive imbalance. Wealthy European countries are, by far, the primary beneficiaries here, while smaller developing nations take the biggest hits relative to their economies. France gains over 3 billion euros in total gross player value from dual citizenship inflows. But then you look at a country like Suriname, the value of the footballing talent they quote-unquote lose to other nations, it's equivalent to over 7% of their entire national GDP. It's a staggering transfer of human wealth.
Which brings us to Section 4, colonial migration corridors.
You have to understand, these global talent flows aren't just random coincidences. They are deeply, deeply tied to historical and institutional links between specific countries. We call these migration corridors. These are established patterns, driven by old colonial relationships, shared languages, geographic proximity, and they are exactly what guide contemporary migration flows and dictate modern player nationality changes.
Just look at the specific routes in the top bilateral corridors. The talent flowing from Italy to Argentina or Cameroon to France maps perfectly onto historical and cultural relationships. You can literally trace the ghost outlines of old empires and historic labor movements just by looking at which national football jerseys players are choosing to wear today.
And the numbers back this up perfectly. A gravity model analysis proves that former colonies lose significantly more player value to their specific former colonizers than to anyone else. Over 75% of France's incoming leg drain value comes straight from its former colonies. For the UK, it's about 70%. Portugal, nearly 79%. The institutional pathways that were carved out centuries ago are the exact same pathways delivering world-class athletes to European stadiums right now.
Okay, on to Section 5, reversing the flow, and how these corridors become two-way streets.
Because things are shifting. We are now witnessing what researchers call reverberative causation, which is really just a fancy way of saying that contemporary migration patterns are echoing or even totally reversing those older historical flows. Over the last few decades, we're seeing athletes born and trained in Europe increasingly choosing to represent the nations of their parents and grandparents.
France is absolutely the ultimate example of this bidirectionality. It's a paradox. Yes, they gain massive talent from overseas, bringing in 61 foreign-born players over the years. But they simultaneously act as a massive training ground for players who eventually represent African national squads. They have essentially lost 114 French-born players to 14 different national teams. You've got entire squads for countries like Algeria and Senegal that are heavily anchored by players who were born, raised, and trained in the French system before deciding to reverse that historical migration corridor.
So, as the quote here perfectly puts it, an athlete's nationality now extends beyond birthplace to heritage, residency, and personal identity. Ultimately, these players are juggling complex, multi-layered identities. They're making a deeply personal choice based on emotional ties, family roots, and, career opportunities. And that personal choice just happens to have massive economic and sporting consequences on the global stage.
So, to wrap this explainer up, as youth academies expand globally and diasporas continue to enrich the sport, we really have to ask ourselves what national representation will look like in the tournaments of tomorrow. In an increasingly borderless world, does wearing a national jersey represent the soil you were born on, the system that trained you, or the heritage of your family? It's a fascinating evolution of global identity, and one we're definitely going to be watching closely every time these players take the pitch. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer.